Well, I have 3 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this online meeting where we're providing our fourth installment of the sheep and goat market update with a big emphasis on the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, got a good slate of speakers for you today. It's been a bit of just over a month since we've been here before, or we came in last time. We gave a little bit of a delay. It was kind of getting a bit repetitive, but anyways, welcome. For today's agenda, I'm going to kind of get it kicked off. My name is Reed Redden. I'm a sheep and goat specialist for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. We're going to have Mr. Robert Pritz join us today. He's been the man behind the curtain through these Zoom meetings, the guy that's running it. He's going to talk to us a little bit about our Sheep and Goat Expo and maybe what to expect. And then sticking with tradition, Dr. David Anderson is going to talk to us about the traditional lamb market update. Mr. Bill Thompson is going to give us a little non-traditional lamb and goat market update. And instead of a animal fibers update this time, we're pleased to have Erica Sanko on with us, and she's going to talk about some of the USDA programs that are out there and try and clarify some things so that people can access those programs as they're sort of fitted to. So we'll keep going here. So Robert Fritz, would you give us a bit of an update about the status of the Texas Sheep and Goat Expo?
Thank you, Reed. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and say a few words about our expo. As everybody knows, we've been under some trying times as far as planning future programming and with some of the regulations that we've had placed on us. And so a lot of things have changed, and I think people expect there to be some opportunities for change, and we're going to embrace those changes. And we are committed. I wanted to let everybody know we are committed to continuing with our Texas Sheep and Goat Expo, August 14th and 15th. What that expo looks like this year may be a little bit different, and I think everybody understands that. And I think we're going to look at this as an opportunity to explore some other different opportunities to bring education in this area. I think there's going to be some opportunities for us to do some face-to-face, and we're committed to trying to have a face-to-face meeting and reopening extension and some of the programming that we have. And I think that this expo is going to be an excellent opportunity for us to take it that direction. But I also think that we're also going to be incorporating some virtual stuff because we will have some guidelines. I know that we will have some social distancing guidelines that we will have to follow. We will have some distancing that we have to maintain, and obviously some meal preps and things that we have to work through. So we are in the process of trying to finalize those last minute plans. And so I just wanted to have the opportunity to get on here and let everybody know that we are planning on August 14th and 15th conducting our Texas Sheep and Goat Expo. And hopefully next week we will have all those details ironed out and finalized so that we can move forward and hopefully have no changes between now and then as well. And Reed, we're working with you as well on the Sheep and Goat Field Day on the same sense. So we'll be coordinating those together and looking forward to having everybody participate August 14th and 15th.
Thank you, Robert. The Sheep and Goat Expo has been a fantastic event, educational event for the industry, and I know everybody's itching to get there and attend that again, and all the networking that they do and education that's provided. And so we want to host that again if possible. We also need to be cognizant of people's health and things as such. So thank you, Robert. Appreciate that update. We'll keep charging ahead then. I want to give a little bit of a background for these meetings. If you haven't been on these before, just a reminder, our first one was April 1st, and that's right when things were shut down mid-March, and we really started to see what was unfolding and the issues that we were having. And then we essentially had two-week follow-ups, April 17th and 30th. If you want to go back and watch those, you're welcome to. They're on a YouTube channel. You can search my name, Reed Redden, and then Texas A&M AgriLife to find that YouTube channel. And there's a playlist there called market updates. And so you can jump in on those and go through the history of the issues that we've been having and how we've been trying to keep you all updated with what's going on. The takeaways for those, just to kind of set the stage for this, our speakers may repeat some of this throughout, but I've always thought that repetition is the language of scholars. And so if it's true, you should repeat it as often as possible. But we really have two lamb trades. We have a traditional market, which has had a lot of issues through this COVID pandemic, and there's a non-traditional market. For the most part, that non-traditional market's held pretty steady. Had some hiccups along the road, but has held pretty steady. Two major holidays that have occurred during this whole, COVID-19 pandemic. We had Easter, which is a big lamb sales, both in the traditional and probably non-traditional market as well. And then Ramadan through the end of April, starting at about the end of April through the end of May, which are big lamb consumption time. So we're past both of those events. And one of the things that we really highlighted on is the lack of food service lamb demand. That food service lamb demand just basically disappeared when all of our restaurants were shut down. They've been open here in Texas almost a month with very little food service demand picking back up. A little bit we hear of, but not anything to really get back us to where we were before. And again, food service being greater than 50% of all lamb consumption in the U.S. The wool market, which we're not going to cover too much today, not a lot's changed there. It's been previously impacted the last 2 years or so by trade issues around the world. That market had been trending down before this occurred, and it has continued to trend down, but there's been very minimal trading going on. So just a little bit of a prelude. There's kind of a timeline that I've used in the past. I think for the sake of time, we'll just keep on chugging away, and we'll jump right in and have Dr. Anderson talk to us about this traditional lamb market. If I can get the remote control transferred over to him, I think you should have it, David. The floor is yours. Take it away.
Look at that. I got it. Thanks, Reed. And thank you again for inviting me to be with y'all today. I certainly appreciate the opportunity. And I'm going to cover some of the traditional market, some of retail demand that we see going on, or at least sales rather than demand, and kind of set the stage for that side of the industry a little bit. I thought I'd start with just, heavyweights, what we'd call slaughter lamb prices. And I'm using Sioux Falls as a sort of a measure of that kind of, certainly a traditional heavyweight slaughter lamb market. It's pretty easy to see the decline that's happened in those prices. I should say I'm going to let Bill handle the San Angelo prices. He'll have those here in a little bit. And I might show a little bit of recovery going on in terms of prices over the last couple of weeks, at least certainly since prices bottomed out as restaurants shut down, and certainly important for this market, for our market, right ahead of Easter. And so, I think this is kind of instructive to see a little bit of rebound from those lows that we've seen going on. I think one of the things that's been certainly, I think, pretty impressive, and in some ways we've been pretty lucky. If we take a look at sheep and lamb slaughter, the collapse going on where we went from about 40,000 head a week down to under 30, yet we've been able to see these numbers rebound. In some ways, we've been pretty fortunate in that, I think we all know the bankruptcy of one plant, yet they've been able to continue to operate and to continue to move forward. And so instead of seeing what I'd say is we've been able to move back to where we were and continue to process lambs to really keep this from balling up even worse. We've certainly, years past, we've certainly seen instances where we've backed up lambs, we got heavy weights, and all the problems that are associated with that. In this case, it appears that we've been able to continue to move forward. I did not bring a chart of weights just for brevity, but weights are chugging along a little bit less than they were a year ago, certainly in the ballpark of where we were. And so we don't see weights rising representing, really a backlog of animals. And so I think this is one thing that's been, boy, I think a bright spot where we've been able to work through some more lambs and not allow them to be backed up any worse. And so I think that's really a bright spot going on in the market. And I think that's related to some of that increase in prices from the trough on those slaughter weight lambs. We can't hardly talk about lamb without talking about trade. We got the latest monthly data last week on lamb imports. April was down from a year ago. Instead of 25 million pounds, we imported about 20 million pounds for the year. We're down 14% from a year ago. And both Australia and New Zealand exports to us are down. Both of those are down, roughly in the ballpark of the same percentage changes each. When I say that, New Zealand lamb this year is made up about 24% of imports, whereas last year it was about 26%. So not a lot of change in between those two markets. But, if we look at some of the weekly data might suggest in May a little uptick in imports, although I would probably caution everybody that the weekly data can often change as it gets summarized, and we look at as it really gets pulled together and finalized. Here early next month, we'll get May's import data, and we'll have a little better notion then of what's going on. But at least some of the weekly data might suggest some growing imports. There we go. We moved on to cold storage. As we all know, we can certainly get, really burdensome supplies in cold storage. With a little bit lower imports, certainly the slowdown in packing and slaughter that we had probably pulled down our imports a little bit. I'll certainly be looking in a couple of weeks for the next round of cold storage data, but we'll have to see how those two shifting things go on. Do we, how have we seen some of the products move through the system with imports being down a little bit? Certainly the decline in slaughter that we had. Do we see cold storage continue to stay down, or is the lack of food service allowed that to boost itself even more than sort of what we would normally see seasonally? But certainly that's where we are so far in terms of cold storage. One of the things I thought I'd do is show this data from IRI, and what we're really looking at here is sales growth versus the same week the year before. So this starts at the week ending March 1 through May 17th. And what I really want to highlight, while this has beef, chicken, pork, turkey, there's a solid blue line there that's lamb. And we see a 55% growth in dollar sales growth versus the same weeks into March. We dropped down to about 9% growth. But we had 108% growth versus the comparable week a year ago. But that really is indicative of Easter trade, of buying and really grocery store buying. Right there is Easter. And then we see the big decline after Easter. But what I think is really important, since the last time we had this conversation, Reed, take a look at this growth in terms of sales growth, in terms of dollar sales growth versus a year ago. We're continuing to see some growth in lamb sales in grocery stores, particularly really as our restaurants continue to struggle. We are seeing some growth. In fact, outpacing, by the time we get to the middle of the month, outpacing most all the other meats sales growth, because we know people are stampeding into grocery stores and certainly buying a lot more meat through grocery stores rather than restaurants. But I think what we're seeing as we got into May is some real progress on the lamb side, particularly with tighter supplies of other meats. It's given some opportunity maybe to get some more sales of lamb or some more exposure in grocery stores where maybe we're not always there. So I think that's another real positive sign in terms of our traditional retail market through grocery stores and restaurants.
David, can I ask?
I think what I decided to close with is a picture of really one of my buddies and colleague, Dr. Justin Benavides, who is at our Research and Extension Center in Amarillo. He put a leg of lamb on the smoker a couple of weeks ago, and this is the beginning picture. This is the first time he's ever tried lamb before. But I guess he'd heard enough of our little videos and us talking about the lamb market. He wanted to give it a shot. That is actually, I wrote it down, that is a garlic and herb paste with Dijon mustard, a whole set of herbs and garlic on there, set on the smoker for a few hours. The recipe actually comes from, I guess I can say this, it comes from Oklahoma Joe's, the folks that make the smokers. I saw the finished pictures and they look pretty darn fantastic. So we got a lot of consumers, potential consumers in the U.S., but there's one new one who had a great experience cooking one himself. And so I thought, what the heck, we're going to talk about a traditional market. I figured I'd just start with it and close with a really good picture of something that looked pretty darn good. And we've made some inroads with one consumer who's going to be coming back. And heck, it always starts with one consumer. So we'll take that as another positive sign of some improvement in the market, at least going forward since we've been together the last month. With that, Reed, I'm going to turn it over to you and kick it to, I guess, my colleague, Bill. Thanks again.
Thanks, David. Appreciate that. I'm glad you spared us the finished product there, because then I would have gotten very hungry during this session.
Me too.
And, there we go. I'm going to switch the remote control over here to Bill as we're moving along here. But I'm going to kind of depart from tradition here, if you don't mind, and I'm going to move back 2 slides because I've got a question here, and I don't want to forget, David. This growth that we're seeing here at the end, this 26, 27 that's going up, that's sales growth. Do you know if that's
sales growth? Is
that because they're putting a higher price tag on the lamb, or is it volume, or is it a combination?
It's so as it's sales growth, it's a combination of both. And that's one of the things that leaves us always, at least it leaves me thinking, this isn't, in that we have both combined together. It does kind of muddy the picture a little bit. Are we selling more, or are we selling the same amount or less, but at a higher price that's overwhelming it? I would probably argue, just looking at some of the other data on wholesale prices, what little bit of retail data I've seen, a little bit of featuring, I think with some lower cut prices that we've seen at wholesale, it wouldn't surprise me if we were able to dig into this, that we might actually see that we're actually increasing some volume as well. Particularly as we think about grocery stores, if we've lost sales at retail, this at least is some evidence that we've been successful in shifting sales to grocery stores. And so, really one of the things I take away from this is I sure want to see positive growth and not declines. Mm-hmm. And so regardless of how we kind of muddy up that data with volume and prices, I'm certainly glad to see it positive. And I think when we look at some of the other meats, we've actually, we're actually later on seeing some positive growth versus them, which might suggest we've grabbed a little bit more of the retail case maybe. And so I think that's a really good question. And hopefully that was a decent answer for what that data really is.
Thanks. Appreciate it. All right, Bill, it's all yours. Take it away.
Okay. Robert Pritz, being the man behind the scene that's orchestrating everything for us, he can make that recipe available to all of us later. I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to start with the goats this week. In the past, I've always started with the lambs, so I'm going to change it up just a little bit. Here is our weighted average monthly prices for kid goats here in San Angelo. And, looking at that chart, you'd be hard pressed to say that we had any ill effects from COVID-19. When we get to looking at the weekly data, there what sure enough was an emotional response to the unknowns at the time, but the market's rebounded right back and things look pretty good. We're well above where we were last year, and certainly above where we the longer term 14 through 18 average. The markets, we typically hit our seasonal lows a little bit later in the summer, in the August, September timeframe for goats, for the kid goats. So normally we're starting to trend down here in the month of June, and it'll continue on, and like I said, till August, September. But so far in the month of June, we're still showing some pretty strong markets. There are some cause for concern out there, and I'm going to go through those with you here for just a minute. This is our weekly data, and again, I've showed this slide at most of the other updates. The area in red is the weekly goat volume that's been run through San Angelo. The blue bars are this year's weekly volume, and then the green bars, the green line are this year's prices. And the thing I want to point out here is the fact that there's several instances where those blue bars are well below the peaks of the red. Basically, that means we're not marketing our goats as quickly as we have in the past, whether we're looking at the 17 through 19 timeframe or even just last year. As it stands right now, we've only at the same point last year, we've only run about 87% of what we ran through the market last year, and we're a little bit closer to that 3-year average, the 17 through 19. We're at about 94% of that, but we're quite a ways behind where we were this time last year as far as moving goats through the sale barn. That concerns me for the reason that, if we start seeing some larger runs of goats showing up in a period of time where prices typically are already decreasing, we could really put some pressure on those prices. The other thing that's probably impacting some of this is our goat meat imports. Here's some annual data. You can see goat meat imports actually dropped in 18. They rebounded fairly strong in 19. But when we look at the weekly stuff, you can see there from about the middle of 2019, goat imports have been decreasing. In fact, the April goat meat import was the smallest we've seen since August of 2016. And I'm willing to attribute a lot of that to some of the problems and issues of dock workers and other stuff that went on that affects our ability to import. So you couple, and my concern comes back to this graph here. If we start seeing some larger runs of goats in the summer when prices are typically going down anyway, if we start seeing additional imported goat meat on the market, we could see some genuine pressure on this market heading into the latter months of the summer. So a little bit of concern about that. We'll just see where the markets take us. Let's jump over to some of our non-traditional slaughter lambs. This market, again, I'm going to say hasn't been all that greatly affected by COVID. And I'm going to say that the markets have been moving and performing a lot like we would expect them to. You can see I've got a 5-year price index and a 10-year price index on this screen, and the markets have been moving about like what we would expect. If we come back and actually look at the prices, we're well above where we were last year, and last year we weren't affected by the COVID. So, I think our non-traditional markets have actually weathered through this in pretty good shape. We're well above and have been all year above where we were last year. We're a little bit below that longer term 14 through 18 average. I'm going to say that this is being demand driven. There seems to be a tremendous amount of demand for these non-traditional lambs. We're not having a hard time moving them through the sale barn. And if you look at some of our weekly data here, you basically see the opposite of what we saw in the goats. Same format in this graph. The red area is the weekly volume average 2017 through 2019. And what you'll notice is most of the blue bars for this year's sales volume are well above that longer term average. So we're not holding back lambs, and bringing those extra lambs hasn't necessarily hurt our markets because we're ahead of last year's pace, and the prices are holding steady in there. Just as a point of reference, we're about 106% of last year's total at this point, and we're a full 26% ahead of that 3-year average, 17 through 19. So we're moving the lambs through the market in pretty good shape, and that tells me there's plenty of demand for those non-traditional lambs that we're producing here in this part of the state. A little bit of the same snapshot that David showed you. This is this is Sioux Falls slaughter lambs, and I concentrated just on the smaller ones that are more similar to what we're selling down here. And just this last week, here's a snapshot of 318 head, averaged 81 pounds. I think this last week our slaughter lambs averaged 75, 76 pounds, so they're a little heavier. But our prices are a full $16 a hundred above what they're seeing up in South Dakota. So I was a little concerned that if these markets went and diverged from themselves considerably, that maybe some of our buyers might head towards some cheaper sources for some of their lambs. I'm going to spend just a minute here talking about some cull ewes here. Our culls actually represent about 15% of our gross revenue, and I think we need to do our due diligence and looking at how we want to market those girls. There's our seasonal charts here. It shouldn't be a big surprise, but the volume of our cull ewes come to market basically July, August, September, June through September. Basically is when we see most of those cull ewes come to town. And you can see typically that's where we have the lows on those ewe prices. I just went and grabbed some data for the last couple years. And if we looked at the 17, 18, and 19, and I just picked those years because that was convenient for me. But if we looked at the average price improvement from June to December, we actually saw an average of nearly $22 a hundredweight. So on a 130-pound ewe, it's about $28 a head. So the decision becomes, is that enough margin to work with? I'll run through this fairly quick without boring everybody, but I just made some general assumptions here. I'd encourage everybody to put a pencil to paper and see if this is worth looking into for your operation. But in this example, I said it takes us 30 acres per animal unit. If we're paying $8 an acre, that's $240 an animal unit. We divide that by 12, that's $20 an animal unit month. Divide that by 6 ewes per animal unit, it's costing us $3.33 for forage for those ewes. Again, not just kind of ballparking things here, but instead of selling them in June, we sell them later. December, I just added 6 months of forage at $3.33, so we're back to that $20 figure. We didn't sell them in June, so we may have an operating note to pay, so we got some interest there possibly, so we add another $2 to that. The question comes down to, though, do you want to pay $22 to chase $28? Not necessarily sure that's enough margin, but everybody's operation is just a little bit different. I'd encourage you to put some thought into this. Let's look at what your forage costs are. Do you have some lower priced forage somewhere that we maybe aren't making use of? Do you have the labor to make this happen? We certainly don't want to interfere with your range management program. You don't want to throw a wrench into your breeding program and having things not where you want them to be. But you take all of that into effect, at least put a pencil to it and see if there's something that you might be able to do to squeeze a few more dollars out of these girls before they leave your operation. And again, just looking at the pattern, we see that there is a pretty substantial increase in those prices. So it's just something to think about as we move forward. And Reed, I'll entertain some questions, or we can just wait till the end if you want.
Yeah, how about we wait till the end? That way we
Okay.
make sure we give plenty of time for Erica to get through these programs, and then hopefully we'll have time at the end. So thank you, Bill. Appreciate
You're
that
welcome.
update. It's pretty good information there. I think it's not all that different from what we've seen before, but it's important to know if things aren't changing, especially if you hear others saying that they are. Anyhow, so with that, we will shift gears again, and we'll have Erica Sanko come in and talk to us. Thank you, Erica, for being here today. And I've talked to you numerous times on different things, and one of those, you explained one of these programs to me very well, and I was like, oh, we got to get her on our market update and give that explanation, because that's the best I've heard before. So with that, thanks for being here. Floor is all yours.
Great. Well, I appreciate it, Reed. I appreciate joining everybody today on the webinar. When asked to give a brief overview on USDA programs, well, today's webinar is about COVID-19 impacts on the sheep industry. So going to focus mostly on the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, or more commonly referred to as CFAP. And let's see, I am not getting
I didn't switch you over. Hang on here.
Technical difficulties. All right.
There you go. You should have it now.
All right. Going back up. How do I go back up to the previous slide? It is not moving up. Looks like I need to go previous a couple. One more back. How do you do that, Reed?
I think there's if you don't move it, let me move it. There we go. There we go.
All right. It just keeps wanting to go down. Go back up. There we go. Apologize for that. So just thought we should just take a step back for a moment and do a brief review of what exactly CFAP is, to try to remind ourselves why it was developed and why the program today looks the way it does. So the program is $16 billion in direct assistance to producers who faced a significant price decline and additional marketing costs due to COVID-19. And we're all familiar with the impacts of the pandemic on our industry, so no need to go into that. The $16 billion was sourced from two areas. $9.5 billion from the CARES Act, and that is specifically for compensating producers for the losses due to price declines. And the period that was selected was between mid-January and mid-April of this year. The remaining $6.5 billion was sourced from the CCC, the Commodity Credit Corporation Act, and that is to compensate producers for losses due to ongoing market disruptions and the transition from COVID-19 market conditions to a post-COVID-19 period. And as I noted here, I stressed assistance program because that's what it is. I believe when this program was being developed, there was a perception within agriculture that it was going to be more of a bailout program, but that is not what this was designed to be. It was to provide relief to producers who were impacted from COVID-19. So to be eligible for CFAP, USDA put in a threshold of a commodity had to suffer a 5% or greater price decline, or experience a significant disruption in the supply chain, or additional significant marketing costs. And that's key when you're thinking about, well, this commodity was covered and this one was not. So the commodities that ended up being eligible for CFAP are dairy, livestock, which includes cattle, hogs, lambs, and yearlings, 11 non-specialty crops, 43 specialty crops, and wool. The American Sheep Industry Association, with its many industry partners, affiliates, and stakeholders, really worked very hard to make sure that our industry was included in this program. If we look back at prior type programs of this nature, our industry has been overlooked. So I say it's kudos to our industry. We not only got lambs and yearlings included, but we also got wool. And now we're part of the commodity group for these type of programs going forward. How the payment program works, it's a single payment. And producers will receive 80% of the maximum total payment up front when the application is approved. The remaining 20% will be paid at a later date if funds are available. There is a cap of $250,000 per individual or entity, and it makes sense. If you're looking at $16 billion and this many commodities and this many producers, the 80% now, the 20% later, and the cap, trying to provide as much relief to as many producers as possible. As of Monday, $1.4 billion had already been paid out to over 80,000 producers, with the bulk of those being in our Midwestern states. And that report is provided weekly on the USDA CFAP website, and there will be a link at the end of the presentation. So with that, we'll quickly touch base on the payment for lambs and yearlings. Lambs and yearlings, as defined by USDA for CFAP, are, and I didn't push that, so I need to go back to previous, thank you, are all sheep less than 2 years of age. It's very straightforward. I believe when this first came out, a lot of producers were trying to read into this, are my ewe lambs eligible, my ram lambs? It is any sheep that is less than 2 years old. So make it work for your operation. Now the payment is combined, it's two parts, and they're combined into one single payment. And if we go back to the source of the 16 billion, you have the CARES portion and the CC portion, it makes sense as to why the payment is calculated the way it's done. So essentially the first part is on actual sales and the second part is on inventory. It is your total payment is the number of lambs and yearlings that were sold between January 15th and April 15th times the CARES rate, which for lambs and yearlings is $33 per head. Lambs and yearlings sold, they had to sell, and you take that number and you times it by 33 head. Then you add the highest inventory number of lambs and yearlings between April 16th and May 14th, and you times that by the CC rate, which is $7 per head. It is pretty self-explanatory, very straightforward. Luckily on the USDA CFAP website, there's a calculator, so you can do it back of the envelope or you can do it via the calculator on the website. And if we move into the next slide, I'm going to do it this way, is the wool payment. And the wool payment is not as clear as the lamb and yearlings payment. I have seen the wool payment explained in many different ways. I have seen the equation presented in at least probably a half dozen formats. This is the most current explanation of the wool payment formula on the USDA CFAP website. If you haven't been to the website in the last few weeks, USDA has responded to questions from ASI and other industry organizations, from producers, and from even their own staff. And so the website has been expanded to include a lot more information, and this is the latest explanation for wool. Wool is being treated like a non-specialty crop, which means we're using inventory and production numbers. And it's inventory subject to price risk. What that means, price risk is unpriced wool. It means you don't have your wool under contract at a set price. So forward contract, a marketing agreement, if you don't have that in place with a price, then that means you are eligible. The payment is based off of units, and units being the smaller of either the 50% of your 2019 wool clip or your 2019 unpriced inventory as of mid-January. So whichever of those two is smaller, that's the unit. And then you plug the unit in, so it's the unit times 50% times the CARES rate, plus units times 50% times the CCC rate. And because we're dealing with wool, we have different rates for graded wool on a clean basis and wool on a non-graded greasy basis. Now, if you notice, I have a little note here for producers who have already been applying for CFAP. They have noticed that in the paperwork online, it actually states mid-April. So I recommend that producers definitely take a look, because even though the documents say, I'm watching Reed move my slides, even though the documents say mid-January, it is actually through April 15th. And we've confirmed that with FSA. So we recommend you definitely double check that, because that can make a big difference on that unit number and then the overall payment. So we'll move on to the next slide. Since my mouse doesn't like the system. We've just to wrap up, there's been some questions since CFAP was released last month, and USDA maybe wasn't the best at answering the questions right from the get-go, but now they have. The number one question we've all received here at ASI is, why did USDA select January 15 to April 15 for the sales period? And I realize the slide is a lot of text, but I think it's worthwhile to go step by step to answer this question. CFAP considers 1/4 of production during the beginning of this year that was significantly impacted by COVID-19. So USDA selected January 15th as the start date. If you add 3 months from January 15th, you get to April 15th, and that is the end of your 1/4 of production that was affected by COVID-19. January 15, according to USDA, was pre-COVID, so that is when they started it. We can sit here and debate if maybe they started too early and should have shifted it to the right of the calendar, but there also was an urgency among agriculture that we get direct assistance out to producers as soon as possible. So according to USDA, they did wait as long as possible to capture as much COVID-19 impacts before submitting the package, because this program had to go through a rulemaking process. And then on the inventory part, which was the CCC part of the payment, they began the inventory in mid-April and ended on May 14th because they had to capture a period after that first quarter production, but before the program was released. Very difficult to do a direct assistance program when you have a date that's after the program is released and after producers are applying for assistance. Yeah, The second question we have received is, why are sheep more than 2 years and older, our replacement ewes and our cull ewes, ineligible? Well, if we go back to the threshold, USDA stated that if a commodity did not suffer a price decline more than 5% from mid-January to mid-April, it was not eligible for CFAP. Currently, USDA is reconsidering commodities that were excluded if there is credible evidence provided. And right now, there is a notice of funding availability, which is a comment period, which ends on June 22nd. And what USDA is asking for is information on commodities that were excluded, and to provide information and justification of it showing a 5% or greater decline in price. So ASI, we've been evaluating replacement and slaughter ewe prices, and we will be submitting comments to USDA here in the next few days, showing why we believe that both replacement ewes and slaughter ewes should be included under CFAP. Now, for any commodities that are currently excluded, if USDA comes back and decides to include those commodities, say they come back and say, yes, replacement ewes should be included, any producers who have applied for CFAP will be able to go back and amend their application. Now, when USDA will make that notice or decision on reconsidering excluded commodities, we'll have to wait and see for further insight after June 22nd. Now, if anybody does choose to comment, you're more than welcome to comment on the current program that we've discussed today, the lamb and yearling program, the wool program, and the breakdowns on rates. But be aware, USDA has already stated they're not changing the rule as it is right now, and they're not going to reevaluate the rates. So you can let them know if it works for you, if it doesn't work for you, and why. But just be aware that the $33, the $7, and how the wool payments are broken down, those numbers are not changing. Also, we've been in contact with many members of the House Ag Committee. There's definitely support to to provide funding to USDA plan for livestock and non-specialty crops. And then finally, just to sum up, all this information today is available. Gosh, Reed, you're pushing me. I'm trying to stay under 10 minutes. So let's go back to that previous slide. So all information today is on the USDA CFAP website. The website is there, as well as a phone number, because some people still like to call directly to an employee. As I mentioned, the CFAP website has changed dramatically since when it was first put out and became live last month. There are fact sheets, there's materials, there's frequently asked questions, webinars that have already been held. The deadline to apply is the end of August. I would recommend you apply now because it's $16 billion, and once it's gone, it's gone. There is a webinar next week for livestock and non-specialty crop producers. It basically tells you what you need to know. And just putting in a plug, if you are sitting on wool, there is also the wool LDP and the wool marketing assistance loans. Those are available. Information available on the ASI website at sheepusa.org. And just because you apply for CFAP does not mean you are not able to apply for wool LDP or MAL. They are both open to all producers at this time. So with that, I appreciate it, Reed. Apologize for the technical issues. Apparently, my system doesn't like the clicking forward on the slides.
Thank you, Erica. I apologize for the issues with clicking. I have some construction going on at the house in the background, and so I was trying to mute my mic and stop it, and I kept advancing you. Except for the last one. That last one was all on you. That wasn't me. But thank you for that very useful information. So with that, I have wrapped up our normal session here, and we can take some questions from the audience. I believe, Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the audience can unmute and ask questions if they'd like. And then I think you can also ask them in a chat. I have not been monitoring the chat. So I see that Bill did provide a link to Oklahoma Joe's recipe for a smoked leg of lamb. So if your gut is still rumbling from that picture that David put up, you can go find that recipe online. Thank you for that, Bill. Appreciate it. Questions for our speakers? Well, you know what they say, if you don't have any questions, you either baffled them with BS or you bedazzled or you bored them to tears, one of the two. So surely we've got some questions out there.
There's one in the chat box now. There's some coming in the chat box, Reed.
Okay. We had a question from Gene Edmiston. What's the difference in pricing for graded versus non-graded wool? For those of us who sell direct, we won't get all of our fleeces graded. Erica, you want to take that one?
Sure. So, Gene, in a way, if I understand your question, you also answered it for me as well. It's simply, if for the graded, you do need to show some sort of self-graded, self-documentation certification that the wool is graded, and you can provide that as part of your application. If you can't provide any type of grading documentation, then it will be considered ungraded and sell on the ungraded, it will be put under the ungraded greasy basis rate. So when you sell all your wool, if it's not all graded, then it's going to fall in the non-graded category.
And the non-graded category at the bottom is basically half of the graded. And since most wool is about 50% yield, you're capturing the vast majority of that value, whether it was graded or not.
That's correct.
Jimmy Doyle, I might have missed it earlier, but have hair sheep or hair lamb prices been affected differently than woolies? Bill, you want to take that one? Bill, you're on mute, I believe. So you're saying something very smart to yourself.
No, I was actually looking at some prices. Looking at what goes through the sale barn here in San Angelo, most we're probably up to like 11-1 hair sheep over our Rambouillet sheep going through the sale barn here anymore. And so we do have a few Rambouillet that are mixed in with some of our hair sheep that are sold as slaughter lambs. But just about everything that's sold as a feeder lamb are our traditional Rambouillets. And they were actually, the feeder lambs were actually doing really strong until the COVID thing hit. And then because of where those the Rambouillet lambs were, the market channel that they would ultimately take with the closing of some plants, some bankruptcies, they got hit really hard, and the prices came down dramatically. But they've much like the chart that David showed, those prices have come back just a little bit, and they're not all that dissimilar right now from what our from what the hair sheep, what our slaughter lambs are bringing. But for a while there, they did get hammered pretty hard.
Thanks, Bill. Another question came in for Erica about nylon wool packs. Erica, would you mind answering that?
So Tom, if I'm reading your question, you're asking if there's any updates regarding tariff relief. So there is an opportunity for those who to apply for an exemption from the tariffs that have been put in place by China. There is a list where a number of commodities are already on that exclusion list. If a commodity is not on that list, then the entity, the business, the individual in China can submit an application so that they can import products at that exclusion rate, being excluded. That's for going into China. I believe your question is coming into the U.S. There's the way the U.S. has handled it is they've released those exclusions in batches. And I'm not sure today, I have to go back and look where nylon wool packs are. They have put out the list for round 1, 2, 3. I need to go back and see if nylon wool packs are on either of those or if they're on the 4A list that's still under comment. Apologize, I was thinking the other way around because most everybody's asking about wool going into China, but I can get back to you, Tom, on where the U.S. has nylon wool packs as to where they're at, which list on that.
Yeah, Erica, we submitted on, this is Tom Gromas. We submitted under, it was a list 4 item, and we submitted our exclusion. Peter helped get that over to Rita, and just continuing the conversation. It's just not something we wanted to pass along to the wool growers or the warehouses.
And I can look into that. Like I said, we've been focusing more on moving wool and pelts into China versus the other way around. And I did, like I said, it's 4A list, I believe, is still open for comment period or was closing soon. And so we can chit chat about that after the webinar, and I'll touch base with Rita.
Anybody that'll listen will hear it from me.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Tom, for just unmuting your mic and engaging with us. We appreciate that. We'd like to hear from the audience. Any other questions? We have 6 minutes till the top of the hour. All right. Well, hearing none, we'll go ahead and conclude this session. Thank you to our speakers, David, Bill, Erica, Robert. Appreciate y'all for coming in and sharing some good information. We'll stay on top of this as we move forward. Let us know if y'all want to hear another update soon. The group will get together and kind of watch the markets, and probably in a couple of weeks or maybe a month, we'll have another update to try and keep you informed of what's going on. That way, if we hear something and we feel like we need to get it out, we'll do that. So with that, thank you all. have a great afternoon. Stay safe. We'll see you next time. Bye now.
Thanks.
Thank you.